Hey guys, welcome to the next episode of Let's Talk Agile. I am here with Rob Broadhead. Rob and we met and we hit it off immediately talking about AI topics in engineering, AI applications inside companies, AI and Agile. And immediately it was clear that we should turn it into a podcast. So this is unscripted. This is just, two professionals talking about the popular topics, our experiences, sharing our thoughts. But anyway, meet Rob. Rob has been in the industry for a long time. Rob, why don't you give us an introduction about yourself? I'm sure you can describe your background better than I can. So again, thanks for joining and welcome to the show.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my background is, as you said, I've been in IT for a little over 30 years now and have watched it grow from, I didn't start with punch cards. I was a little bit beyond that, but pretty darn close. I've watched a lot of growth, been huge into, applicable to this, been huge into Agile for decades now, since early on. I remember when the Agile Manifesto first was posted and some of the things were going on at that time, and have really been a part of a lot of projects over the years. And then now AI is, been on the scene, been very heavy in AI. That's our primary focus consulting wise for the last little bit, and probably for the next several years, at least until the next new technology comes out. And but boy, mixing the two and how that one will impact the other will be, I think we should do a podcast about it. I think it'll be a great conversation.
Well, thanks again for joining me. And I guess, why don't we just jump right in? So you used the word that is all about this podcast, Let's Talk Agile. So why don't we start with that? Is AI and Agile actually a good mix? How do you think traditional Agile practices fit with AI development, if it does any at all?
If you look at AI as a tool, as opposed to, and really look at it as the promise of a productivity improvement tool, then it really, to me, should help Agile be more agile, basically. So, because what you should be able to do theoretically is, if you're using AI and you're doing whatever your tasks are for your sprint, or, as part of the Agile approach, you should be able to just simply do them faster. And if you do them right, since you have more time, you should be more likely to do them right. So you can do all the things, design and implementation and testing. And I think the challenge with AI is really what the challenge was when people first went into Agile, is the design part of it, is actually thinking through the problem before you start trying to implement it, trying to code it. I think some people thought early on, and still I've had these conversations in Agile and waterfall circles and some of those, where they say, well, you don't really design as much in Agile. But I'm like, no, Agile does not remove any of those key pieces. And I think introducing AI just helps us. I think we can use it in two ways. It's a productivity tool to help us just get code done faster. I use that all the time. I can get stuff done a lot faster, debugging. I can get it done cleaner because I can actually use it as a traffic cop. It's like a lot of static code analysis tools are essentially the same way, where it'll say, okay, let's make sure that I didn't miss something. I didn't, do something wrong when I committed it. And so I think it allows us to do it better. I do think there's going to be, it's interesting because I think there are roles that could change. In particular, I literally had a conversation, I think it was just yesterday, with my wife, who is actually a certified Scrum Master and product owner, about the Scrum Master role specifically. Because I said, what do you think? We talked about, like, if the Scrum Master is really just a project manager of sorts, that's really just moving tickets around and things like that, and then doing a retrospective afterwards, then maybe Scrum Master isn't needed. And AI can do that stuff. It can do a meeting summary. It can just say, it can analyze what was done and say, this is what you should do better. We sort of put a pin in that, because I think we have to see where it's going, because there's still a human part of, just like there is design, there's a human part of improvement and assessment that I think we still need that there's a lot of things they'll do, but I think we need the human touch.
So I don't disagree with you, but I do have concerns over the Scrum framework. The sprints, the meaning of the sprints, and I kind of published an article about the purpose of sprints, will change. there won't be any more of this planning for 2 weeks in advance. And the reason is because AI can evolve a lot faster. So instead of thinking about completing a volume of work in a period of time, AI will give us problems of unblocking the AI so AI can do work better. And the theory of constraints, which is what's actually defined, for example, in XP, that is going to be hit first. Sort of Kent Beck's analogy of watch where the boxes start piling up. That's your constraint, right? So if we look at the engineering teams, at least now, and we're seeing the pile of boxes being stuck in PR reviews, then, obviously we have a different problem we need to solve, right? I also think that the teams will be shrinking in size. And then the natural thing that's happening is it's exposing the flows in requirements. So there was this big push in Agile where you didn't have details in requirements, right? You just needed to have conversation starters, something enough that the team can bite on so it can work and provide alternatives. But with AI, in order for AI to work, you need more context. You need more information. You need what's called spec-driven development, which means somebody needs to prepare that work before anybody can take that on. And in a typical Agile team, for example, a Scrum team, that effort is happening right within the sprint most of the time, right? People don't really do the preparation, the detailed preparation up front, but now there's a shifting force. So I think the Kanban, Scrumban models, where prioritization plays a bigger role in the structure and optimizing the flow is sort of the AI era development process. The Scrum, where you try to fit a certain volume of work and have uninterrupted teams for a period of time, I don't think that can work. I mean, Scrum Master's entire job was to run interference, right? Protect the team from interruptions. That's not happening anymore. The teams are expected to jump in and react real quick. The pace has changed. So I think certain frameworks are definitely becoming obsolete.
I 100% agree with that. I didn't go there yet, but I think it's the exact same reason that you see why teams that are highly reactive, that are like firefighting, I refer to them as firefighting teams, who really like they're fixing bugs and things like that. It's like, we need to get this done right away. We don't have time to go through the process and then wait and talk about it later. And so I think the Scrum, the framework as it exists, I think somewhat, it definitely will change because the cycles will be very fast. I agree. I think you will need less people. I think the people that are part of the teams would by nature then shift to more designers and architects and maybe testers as opposed to implementers, because that's where, just with AI, that's where more of our time is now spent, as you mentioned, like requirements definition and things like that. The thing about Scrum is that the timeframes, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% agreement on that, but I do think that there is at least a large portion of projects that will just disappear because Scrum's too big. Even a 1 week sprint, it would almost force you into like 1 or 2 day sprints, and then that becomes, there's too much churn. So I think there's a lot of projects will disappear from the sprint approach at least. But one of the things I found with my teams is one of the best things that we got was when we do regular design reviews, which essentially we always did them as scrums. We would do it every couple of weeks. We'd do a review and a retrospective. And still those pieces, I think, stay in place. It makes sense to periodically do a demo in front of the customer and not just have, developers running wild, but to actually sit down and have a usable demo.
Really good point. I'm not a proponent of eliminating sprint. I actually like the Scrumban model a lot more than Kanban because it forces you to do two things. Number one, if you cut off automatically a slice of, let's say, 2 weeks, you can retrospectively take a look and analyze what the team has been able to accomplish for 2 weeks. and you can assess and measure against previous 2 weeks, next 2 weeks, how the team is actually doing, which gives you a little bit more information for feedback loops. The purpose of sprint was the learning experience, right? So the learning experience is still there. How are we working? What's working? What's not? What can we improve? The discipline around creating retrospective in a Kanban flow, at least in my experience, wasn't that good. It's people tend to push things off, schedule it at the wild period of time, skipping. And I think forcing the feedback loops is a lot better in the long term, just for self-improvement, getting teams into a cohesive rhythm. The other thing is it does give you the opportunity to have a reflection of what was delivered in that time period, and do deliver, a demo, do have a session with a customer. I don't think those things should be going away. But by the same token, that's not the only way to do it, because you could do it for every single feature you deliver, depending on the relationship you have. For example, if you're working with a customer and you're developing their product, and they have a person inside of the company that is dedicated to seeing the execution, you could have a really awesome relationship where all you need is to schedule a meeting on their calendar and have a conversation at any time. Then you don't need to wait every 2 weeks to go through the bulk delivery. You could do that as a part of the PM review process, right? Even before the QA gets started, you can confirm that you've built exactly what the customer wanted. So there are different opportunities to optimize. I think the cadence does have a value. I just think that estimating how much work you can fit into that block of time is something that does not need to happen anymore. The silly velocity metrics, the story poker games, and all of that other stuff, the kind of the friction that really does not provide a lot of value.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because once again, it goes back way, way back to where everything started, essentially, in the Mythical Man month, and the whole idea of like, how do we measure and estimate? You can use points, you can use there's all the ways we've tried. And I think this blows it up again and it's honestly, like in the consulting industry, is where I talk a lot to people about this, because it changes. If what your hourly rate was, without AI, now you're doing so much more. And so it really says more to like, okay, well, am I still providing the same amount, same value per hour? I'm probably actually, in some cases, providing a lot more because I'm getting a lot more done. But then how do you change that? And it's the same thing with estimation. It says, okay, well, if I'm going to take 2 weeks, let's say it's a 2-week sprint, I'm going to say, what can I do in 2 weeks? I think there's 2 issues with that. The one we all know is the estimation has always been a challenge because there could be issues. I think it's actually going to be augmented a little bit more or accentuated more and show how broken the process is when you introduce AI, because now, if you're a good developer, you're probably actually moving into, if you're we'll call it an AI augmented developer, if you're using AI, you're going to be able to cycle through stuff so fast to be able to like just test stuff and advance stuff and put together features that you're going to be able to really, in a couple of days, you can really put together a lot in a small period of time, as far as just like generating all the code and the test spaces and stuff.
So this is an interesting one. I like what you're saying, but here's what's going to happen, right? As a developer, former developer, I could tell you immediately what's going to happen. If my boss comes to me and says, hey, Alex, here's a great tool that's going to make you 50% faster with writing code, I'm like, ooh, this is awesome. If this is faster, that means the 50% of the time I just saved on writing code, I can apply to design, the architecture, the testing, all the loose ends that I always skip over because I'm constantly pressured to deliver this volume of work. But what's going to happen is the management is going to come back and go, hey, you're 50% faster. We want you to do 50% more work. Right? So people need to understand that the agile process that existed before, unfortunately, had everybody cutting corners, and the stress that the agile process was supposed to protect the team from, so they can really get to the doneness of whatever they're working on, hasn't happened. That pressure just kept them working more and more and more and more. Like the original pitch of Scrum, for example, back when Ken Schwaber came to the company where I worked and taught the team, it was, hey guys, you don't need to work more than 40 hours a week to reach your own company goals. I was like, awesome. And then before you know it, a decade goes by and everybody's just sweating for that Friday night. The QA doesn't sleep, even though the sprint ended on Friday. They're still finishing the testing over the weekend. Bugs are being fixed by Monday because that's when we're going to do the sprint review. And the work is still happening, with the loose ends. And that stuff needs to stop. So I think if there's a message that I want to send in this podcast to like leadership is like, hey guys, it's awesome that you freed up your team. Now let them actually finish their work.
Oh, I agree 100%. That's where I think that, as I said, like AI is going to accentuate where the process is broken, because it's going to be something where it's like, look, we can actually, will probably be something like, we'll let the AI work all weekend and it'll code all weekend and it'll bring it home. And it's going to end up breaking. You're going to end up the same stuff. And honestly, it's where maybe you leverage AI and you say, look, even the AI is saying, we haven't spent enough time on this. We haven't tested this. We haven't designed this. We're getting in these cycles. And yes, it's like the industry, there's issues that are broken. And I think I agree 100% is that if you don't use this as an opportunity actually to go back and fix some of that, like for example, AI can do a lot of technical debt kind of cleanup, as it can go do some documentation. Some of the things that we've always wanted to do, it can help. And that may be what we end up doing. Is it's like, it'll be interesting to see how teams embrace it, because it may be that it's not AI augmented developers. It's just the team has an AI, maybe a developer or something where it's just saying, I'm just somebody that's using AI to clean up all the crap we didn't get, fixed up in our prior sprints.
So we went through a few iterations of AI, right? First, AI use was, hey, we got ChatGPT. I can copy and paste code, or I can ask it to write me functions. And then it'll come back, it'll give me the syntax, like, hey, give me a query that's going to do ABC. Like something basic. People would used to take that stuff, copy it, paste it in the code, have a real good control, or be like, hey, here's a block of function, write me a unit test. That's the way people started. Then the next iterations, we got the Copilots, and we got, the AI that would scan the code base. And now you're developing not just functions. Now it changes, 1,200 files if need be. So the second process was around augmenting the developers by giving them the right tools. This is when they're getting a little bit faster, but they are still in control of the process. Now we're getting to the point where we got agents. And with an agent, you can have an AI team. You can have different AI agents by different LLM providers that do different tasks. You could have one that scans the requirement and says, hey, is this something I can do? Let me put it into this bucket. This stuff I can do because I can read the code, I can read the requirement. It's something I can handle. Then we have a next AI agent that says, hey, out of this list, we know we can handle. Let me go ahead and make that change. And it's going to run, and it's going to make the change, and it's going to create a PR, and it's going to wait for the code review. Then you get the next AI agent, and that one is created by a different LLM. And that next AI agent is going to be doing a code review. And we don't necessarily want to trust one agent to do a code review, so we're going to have another to double check. Why not? Because usually PR reviews two people, right? So we're going to have the PR review that comes through and makes review, and maybe even goes back to the previous agent to make the changes that are applicable to what the review said. Finally, we get to the point where we have a PR that needs to be validated by the human being. Here's the problem. When we are working towards the goal, we have priority work. But when we are working, there's a lot of additional work that gets created. A customer asked for a minor change. Support case came down. We discovered we need to handle tech debt. There's a bug that got added. All of these things are compounded to the end of the backlog. Meanwhile, the team is working by top priority, right? They're pulling the most important things. Well, let's say there's a team of these agents that's just basically preparing stuff for PR review. Now what we're doing is we're beginning to deflect our attention from priority to doing the things that the agents just did. We're basically sinking the capacity from the most valuable things to the things that are pretty much done but still need verification. We're essentially robbing Paul to pay Peter, right? That's an interesting dilemma, because from one perspective, you could say, yes, we're accelerating, we're getting a lot more done, but we're not actually moving the needle along.
It's really, I mean, this is the classic issue that especially like entrepreneurs run into a lot, is where you're a specialist, or, anything where you're a specialist and now you're scaling yourself, is that you're hiring other people, because there is a period of time where whoever it is you bring on, they're not going to do it as good as you. And so there is an investment that you make into that person. Now, the problem is, if you don't do it, then you're always going to be limiting. You end up doing stuff that you don't need to do. You're doing these, minor things, and you're wasting your time, for lack of a better term. The other thing is this doesn't change the problem. We still have essentially the same problem. We have to figure out, and I think that's part of what we do here, is like figure out where do we trust AI enough? But also, it's like, I think a lot of it comes down to us figuring out what are the tests and the guardrails that we can use, so that we can make sure that that we're not spending too much time essentially pair programming with our AI tools and having to go back and double check everything and spend all that time. And instead being able to say, okay, here's your sandbox, here's your requirements. You can go build it. We've got something on the other end that we're going to be able to, check some boxes or whatever we're going to do to be able to keep that review reasonable and hopefully not become that blocking point. But maybe it is. Maybe it becomes that we're still stuck wherever the human is where the backlog occurs.
I don't think we're going to get rid of the bottleneck, because the bottleneck will always exist. AI will never be 100% sure. Neither is a human being, but at the human being level, we can check. And because we actually have intelligence as opposed to patterns of statistical probability, right? So it's a little bit different. We know context that the AI may not know. And from one perspective, it makes sense that it's sort of accelerating, and creating a team of agents can accelerate. But if you don't staff people for that specific function to take a look at those PR reviews explicitly, and if you're asking your feature development team to constantly be distracted by whatever the AI generates, you are not going to be making progress. And that's a typical thing that an agile team was designed to protect against, being pulled in all multiple directions. So you now have to staff to do something about that. At some point, it's the diminishing returns, right? You're sort of spending a lot of times on busy things, but you're neglecting the valuable things. And it may not be as important for a large enterprise, because they're probably making money and have the budgets to spend on this. But it's definitely a problem for leaner organizations. They need to be smarter with their investments. So in that perspective, AI could actually be creating more unnecessary work.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I think we're going to run into, and this actually goes back to the earlier comment about, everybody thought Agile was going to make us work faster, and then suddenly everybody's still working, 80 hours, 100 hours a week, or whatever they're doing. I think there is still, with any of this work, there is a level of design mental work that you need. There's a level of human mental work that is required to think about this stuff, to be able to digest it, to be able to project and build requirements, and just all of the things that we do mentally to create software before we even touch code. But it's also part of touching code. So I think that's, even though we can find some of the things that take us longer. I was saying the other day that it's like Star Trek, when they would sit there and go like, write me an app, computer, do this, computer, do that. We're there to some extent because there are things that it can do this stuff. I think that's where, we're going to realize, I think, very quickly that AI is still, it's just pattern recognition at the end of the day. There's only so much it can do. And so it can help us with the things, just like everything else. We're going to figure out where's it best leveraged and use it just for that. Because then once, like you said, I think if we start putting it out of its lane, if we start trying to get it to do stuff that it really doesn't do well, you're going to end up spending more time correcting it, fixing it, trying to have that chat conversation. And I think people are seeing this already. There are people that are in AI and chatting with it on a daily basis and seeing where it breaks down and where the limits are and where this task, yeah, I could have AI do it and I can work with it, but by the time I'm done, I'm better off doing it myself because AI is actually not going to learn to do it better. And it goes to your logging issue is a really interesting one, is AI can watch the logs and it can correct the code, but what happens about the things that are systemic flaws that it's actually bandaging stuff forever and it's just finding an error and it's correcting it, but it never actually knows, or even, it never thinks, what is the actual problem that's occurring? I'm just treating stuff. I'm not actually solving a problem. So you could have something that's eventually huge.
Like a
Yeah.
business problem, for example. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with the code. It's an actual business problem, like a business workflow that's broken.
Mhm.
So this brings up an interesting topic. So a lot of AI initiatives fail. And I don't remember, don't quote me, I don't remember if it's 90%, 80%. What was every time you
I think it's
open up,
70%, something like that.
there's a
Yeah.
new article with a new percentage slapped. I don't know where they pulled that number from, but we definitely know it's failing in many places. And it's not failing because of technology. It's failing because of lack of data ownership, of decision
Mhm.
making, leadership problems. There's many other things, but in your experience, where do you think the AI breaks down inside of the organizations?
It does. It really does go to the big umbrella would be organizational readiness. And it really comes down to like the capability maturity model, I think, of businesses in general. There's like, 5 levels, and most companies are like 1 or 2. And even companies that are like very high up there, very often are very big, and they generally are in pretty good shape, but they got all these little silos because they're just so big. It's just what happens is you get also these little silos. So you get so big, nobody, whether it's a big company or a small company, too often you have it where nobody really knows where all the skeletons are buried, that nobody really understands the completeness of how the organization works. And that's where AI is the problem is you're not ready for AI because you don't understand your processes enough. You haven't spent enough time resolving the tasks, the processes, the steps that you do in your business enough that you can tell AI in detail how to do it. And so people say, well, I'm going to do it. And then they'll throw it to AI and then it breaks. And the thing is that, and I've seen this with, lots of like ERP installs and stuff like that, other big systems where it ends up, quote, failing, or it gets abandoned because somewhere along the line, somebody says, we're spending a lot of money trying to make this tool work. And what we really need to do is we need to go back and make essentially our business and our processes work. We need to make sure what problem we're solving and be able to define it enough before we try to automate it and, of course, put AI to it.
So I created a different term. Instead of AI, I actually flipped the I and the A. Instead of calling it artificial intelligence, because I don't think there's any intelligence at all, it's just mathematics. I call it intelligent automation, because that's really what we're doing. We're doing intelligent automation. All right.
Mhm.
Why is it intelligent? It's because it's based on data, but the rest of it is automation of what you want to do with it. Right. And a lot of times the organizations just, in order to automate anything, you have to have your manual process down. You have to take what you already have and make it repeatable. Right. And if you don't have a repeatable process, how can you roll out the AI on top of it? Right. You can't, because it's almost like taking a Band-Aid on top and hoping that the technology is going to solve the problems. But
Mhm.
I think we got to own up to it, right? And it needs to be purposeful. You can't just slap a tool and be like, oh, well, it's just going to take care of it. Well, no, not a foolproof tool. It'll come up with other problems. Like, for example, I've been working on writing a lot of articles. And what I do in the articles is I usually write an article, then I throw it into the AI, then it spits out something back, then I take certain clauses that I like, then I rewrite other ones, and eventually I get to something that I really, really like. So I use, AI-assisted writing, if you will. I don't tell ChatGPT to write me an article that's just ridiculous. It'll spit out the same stuff everybody else does. So I just go section by section and I chisel what I want out of it. I like it because it can bounce ideas. But what I found is, in the end, when I have my article and I go critique it, and it starts giving me advice, how I can improve it, I found that it's very circular. I make a change to what it wants, give it again and say, well, what do you think now? And it's going to take that same advice that it just gave me and flip it again into the opposite direction. And now I'm just spinning wheels because I'm at the point where it's not actually improving. It's tarnishing what I created, and it's changing the meaning, positioning, and the language. I think the terminology is the power of diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm. Well, I found it's been very interesting to me as I'm explore using AI and I will do competing AI engines at times. I love to I use Perplexity a lot. So I love to use Perplexity and ChatGPT and then just swap it back and forth. And I'll tell Chat, I'll be like, well, I just gave this Perplexity and this is what it said. And it'll say, oh, yeah, that's right. You could look at it this way. And sometimes it'll argue, sometimes it won't. But I think of it like if you ever get somebody that does a home inspection, they will never come through and say the home is awesome. They'll always find something. And somewhere along the way, AI has the same thing. I have never sent something through AI and said, assess this, and I can tell it very tightly how to assess it without it coming back and saying, by the way, you could do this, or why don't you try that? And so this is where I think it very much has to have our expert opinion, because otherwise, like you said, what you'll end up is you'll either end up in analysis paralysis, essentially, because it'll just keep telling you, it'll get in a cycle and keep telling you to keep changing stuff, or you'll end up with something that everybody else would get. If you can't put your own stamp on it, and I love the piecemeal approach of taking an article and then almost take it like point by point or paragraph by paragraph, and then wordsmithing that, and then look at the whole thing, and then, you adjust it for the flow, because that's where AI, I think, falls short. It just can't do, it's pattern recognizing, and it can't do the art side of patterns.
So this is where we have to talk about product-led growth. Okay. So the part around AI spitting out in the end those 3 questions and suggestions has nothing to do with AI. What it has to do with stickiness of whatever the tool you're using. What they're trying to get you to do is continue interacting with your tool. And they're using human curiosity, our emotions, against us by asking 3 questions and tweaking. Okay? This is not AI. AI ended when it gave you the answers. The rest is engineered behavior. Okay? So whenever those 3 questions come around, it's basically to show that the AI systems are being utilized heavily, right? We're still talking about an industry that's losing money left and right. They're still engineering behaviors. They're trying to change our habits. They don't want us to Google. They want us to keep prompting. So this is where I kind of frown upon it. The other thing that I don't like is AI never says, you're wrong. It says, oh, you're right. Oh, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I said 2 + 2 = 4. I really meant 2 + 2 = 5 because you just told me that. It could say you're wrong, right? And sometimes it does in certain different ways, depending on what the tool you're using. But a lot of times it's like, oh, you're right. Like, it always agrees with you. It always Again, that's
Mhm.
behavioral engineering. That has nothing to do with the statistical response. So I think
And that's true.
a lot of it is, and this is where I don't buy the artificial intelligence. I think it's intelligent automation.
I agree 100% is that there is definitely I think that's where you have to it's gosh, it's like so much other stuff we run into. You have to understand when you're being sold to, when you're being productized. Like, it's just like any of the social networks, basically. I mean, a lot of what they do, your feed is based off of your behavior and it's meant to make you stick. And AI is no different, I think. I mean, they try to claim that it is, but I mean, I think it's inarguable when you watch how it works that it runs the same patterns that all it does, and it's pretty darn good at it, but making us keep using it.
And it's the same thing like text messages, remember? Remember when we used to buy how many text messages you used to send, and the providers used to start increasing the plans, so now you have 10,000 messages that you could send a month, and now it's just part of your unlimited plan. Send as many as you want because nobody really cares. But it was done to create that stickiness,
Mhm.
right? The more messages you exchange, the more they make money, right? Same thing now with the tokens, right? You're paying for the tokens. Let's ask more questions. You'll burn the tokens. We don't want you to have rollover like we did with minutes back
Yeah.
in the cell phone days. So I think they're kind of following the same blueprint. It's just
Mhm.
that we don't ask ourselves that question. And it was consumer driven adoption, right? So people would not use AI and would not try to run and integrate it with every part of the organization unless they had experience with it themselves and they thought it was so amazing, right? Because in the end, it's all behavioral engineering. Oh my God, this tool can help me do this. What would it do for my organization? So I think we got to start looking at it, and that's where I think the false promises come around in the
Mhm.
companies. Just because AI was able to give me some pretty cool responses to things that I didn't know or optimize something that I would be doing, oh, chances are I could apply it pretty much anywhere. Well, hold on a second. Where do we want to apply it? What's the benefit we're looking for? Is it really worth it? And what how are we actually shifting the roles and responsibilities of the organization applying this tool? Are we losing domain experience, domain knowledge? Because now we have to shift some people around. And what happens if the system doesn't work? What happens if there's an outage for half a day? Right. So I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be asked. Like as an additional resource, it has a lot of power. But as an automation technique, you have to be very careful where you apply it.
I think that's like a really good that's a really good path to go down because I see a lot of benefit in using AI as sort of like the bull in the channel chop approach is, it used to be we would you would solve a specific problem and then you would solve it again essentially, and then over time you would find a general solution and you would you would refine the approach to eventually get a good general solution. I think what AI gives us is very quickly you can get a brute force attack solution to whatever your problem is. So you can say, hey, I need to solve this problem, which is fine if you want it solved real quick and want to see, a solution. Give me a bubble sort of this. Okay, fine, it'll do that. But over time, that is that is never what you're going to want. So I think that's where a lot of it, I see that a lot, and I'm hoping we're going to see a change away from that, where it's sort of like this initial rush to AI. But then when companies even see like the costs behind it and what's going on there, they're like, wait a minute, this isn't that. This isn't a silver bullet. This isn't solving all the problems for free. It's going to end up actually being more expensive to solve the problem if we use AI, which I think is where you need to have, it comes back to where you have, developers and people like, like us that say, well, wait a minute, it's doing pattern recognition at scale. We can, if we know the pattern and we understand it, we can do it at a very specific way and make it very tightly performing and tuned and all the things you need to so that you don't need to use AI and you end up getting the answer a lot faster. And I think that's where that goes back to being, ready. It really is. I love your inverted IA because it really AI is no different than automation. It really, to me, it's just the next step from like N8N and some of the low code, no code, and some of those things.
It's intelligent automation because it does
Mhm.
have that power of, contextual understanding and statistical analysis and the machine learning and, the stuff that is pretty powerful if you apply it the right way.
Mhm.
So let's change gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about the AI ready organizations, and honestly, I struggle to define what is an AI ready organization. What does that look like? So Rob, this is probably your area. I'd love to learn your perspective on this.
I think the real interesting one because I built using AI, of course, as part of it, but I built a tool starting probably now about 6 months to a year ago. Really, it was initially a focus on businesses that are just ready to make a big move, and it usually is, I always refer to it, the most common one is when a business goes from survival mode to scaling mode, where they've just been doing a lot of stuff and now they realize we don't have processes, or if we do, they're not repeatable, they're not documented. You're not really ready to grow because you don't really know what you have that you're working with. And so we're actually working on trying to, it's not really productize, but actually scientifically put that into a bucket of sorts. And it really has come down to, because I asked myself that a while back. I was like, well, what makes it, what are the companies that I've worked with that what makes it work and what makes them not ready? Where are the, and it really was pointing out the areas where they would fall down. And a lot of it comes around the things that you'll see. It's things like ownership. There's a process somewhere that somebody doesn't own. Or if they do, it's not, I guess it's knowership. At that point, it's like nobody knows who owns it. It's the data itself. It's like people have junk data, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you've got junk data, if you've got duplicated data, if you don't actually understand where the data comes from and where it goes, if you don't understand that flow, then you're going to miss out. Something's not going to work. If you don't understand your processes themselves, and so it's not just the data, but the value of the data. It's not just like, what am I moving, but what am I moving and why? What is the value to that? Is it something that my business needs? Is it something that's required by, HIPAA or some sort of regulation? Is it something that's required by a vendor? Is it something that is needed to get you from customer interest all the way through to fulfillment? There's a lot of different reasons they're there. If KPIs, and this actually goes back to the data warehousing days. It's like when you would build a data warehouse, one of the first things a good data warehouse architect would say was like, what are you going to want to get out of it? Because we can get you a lot of data, but the key is we don't put the data in it and you ask questions about it, the data's not there, which is honestly the same thing AI runs into. If I don't give it enough information and context within the prompts, then it's not going to be able to answer that question. So AI readiness actually, to me, feels more like an interview process with any organization. Is that you can have a good sense that you're AI ready if you think these things you're ready for them, that you have these things defined and ready to, especially to a point where you can actually tell somebody at a very detailed, somebody being that intelligent automation, in a very detailed way, how this works, what is it supposed to do, what are the exceptions, what do you do if it, acts of God and things break? Like, it's not just the happy path. It's what actually we coined in our podcast back because of somebody trying to the really bad, the psychopaths, the things that are like random stuff that occur in software or with users when they use it completely different from how you expected them to. And so it really becomes asking yourself as an organization, the questions that are, what do we do? How do we do it? Do we all agree on that? Because sometimes you'll talk to a CEO and they'll say, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. And maybe 2 or 3 levels of management down, they'll all agree that this is how we do it. We're, this kind of an organization, and we've got all these certifications, and this is how we do it. But then you go down to the people that actually do the work, and they're like, yeah, we use that thing, but we actually have these 18 other spreadsheets that we use because we have to, because if we don't, then this other stuff doesn't get built. So it really is, AI readiness is really organizational awareness. It really comes down to understanding truly what your organization does and being able to communicate that in a very clear, specific, detailed way to, the AI tool, but actually even before that to just, which is why software projects have failed so much in the past. It's actually a lot of times the same thing is if you can't explain the details enough, then whoever it is not going to be able to give you, to just create those details out of whole cloth. Now, developers have learned to ask questions, and they've also learned, that's why the better developers have business knowledge and stuff like that, is they understand that there's a gap here, or there's something here that I can't just, I just can't make it up. I don't know the answer to the question. They'll go back. AI is not going to give us that. So that's where it's just going to highlight that problem, I think, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I like that. This reminds me of a couple of things. Number one, my previous startup was in the insurance space. And everybody thinks of insurance as this big, heavy, slow industry. And it is. It truly is. But the part about the industry that I deeply respect is that each of the insurance carriers has an innovation arm. And the innovation arm is usually staffed by people whose entire job is to understand workflows of the entire organization, explore solutions that could be brought to solve those problems. And as far as solutions, and the reason why there's an innovation arm, a lot of the solutions are not existing large vendors. They are small startups. They are entrepreneurs, basically a ton of ideas that can solve problems. And the reason why insurance industry is extremely careful with it, even though the approach is solid, like their innovation teams are really, really strong. I loved working with some of them. But the reason they're solid is because they take a look at it from a customer service perspective also. It's not necessarily all about the tooling. It's also about the customer experience. So yes, they want to solve the internal process, but they don't want to degrade the experience of their members, right? And so it creates this very fine balance of innovation versus value, right? How innovative can we be and what kind of value can we get? What's the benefit in savings or speed or other improvements, right? On one side, and what's the cost on the other, right? Because you have to take a look at all these multiple forces from different angle. And I think this is where a lot of organizations don't even have those innovations on. They really don't take a look at it holistically. Like, for example, I had a talk with one company recently and I said, hey, what are you guys doing with AI? And they're like, well, we have a couple architects that are AI architects. I go, oh yeah, how so? Well, they developed a couple wrappers on top of ChatGPT. I go, well, what makes them an AI architect? Well, just, they wrapped this thing, they built the chatbot. I go, well, that doesn't really make them an AI architect. An AI architect needs to architect the solution, not build the wrapper, right? What's the problem they're trying to solve? What's the business they fit into it? I'm like, AI architect should work under somebody that's thinking about the business, the overarching value. Where can we benefit from AI? What should we try? And, they didn't have a role that actually represented that function. Instead, it was just, okay, well, we're going to have an idea. We're going to play around with it. Well, if all you're doing is you're playing around, it's not a deliberate professional, investment opportunity. It is a hobby expecting to just play around and learn. So if you take a look at a success factor, which one is going to have a bigger chance of success, right? The professional, deliberate, purposeful, prepared, the AI ready concept, or, hey, we're just going to throw some people behind it and just build us something. And I think this is where a lot of fail.
I agree. And I hate this every time we get into this, is that people we get into these cycles where there's these, these labels and it's something like, hey, I'm a blah, blah developer, whatever it is. And so everybody now is like, I'm an AI architect and I'm a this and I hate it because I also have that on my name where it's like, yes, I do AI architecture and things like that. But it's not because the AI was there. It's actually because the architect was there before. And it really goes back to AI is just another automation tool at the end of the day. If you're not actually architecting your business and your solutions, and you talked about something else that is a whole different can of worms to talk about, is the whole, like, sometimes the impersonal AI approach is the worst possible approach. And we see this with, like, we've seen this with the automated phone systems. We see this with some of the chat bots. Is it's just like people don't want that. They want the human touch. They're okay spending a little more time because now they feel like there is a person on the other end and not just some, some solution that just was like, boom, thrown at you. Cause yeah, it solves your problem quickly, maybe. But then what happens if it doesn't solve my problem? And there's so many other things that, especially like insurance is a very complicated industry in that sense, because you've got very hard math on the one side. You're talking about like, risk assessments and all that kind of stuff that go into making sure an insurance company can make money and all that kind of stuff. But then it's also very much an emotional kind of thing, because you're dealing usually with people that are not, they'll buy insurance early on, but when you're actually paying it out, they're not in the best of places. They've had an accident or a death in the family or something like that. So it really spans, I would say, like both ends of a business, the very hard, like cold business side of business, but then the very human side of like making customers feel wanted. And those are the things that I think, we as a human race seem to like love to slap these things onto every solution. And you're seeing it now with all these people getting laid off and stuff like that. And that doesn't even get into the whole, what happens when you don't have junior developers anymore because they got wiped out and everybody said, well, we just need an AI instead of that. This goes back to like when and where is it truly useful?
This reminds me of this meme by my friends, the Arguing Agile podcast, Brian and Om, and they had a meme on their channel. An AI product manager is just a product manager, right?
Yeah.
And it was funny. I agree. I think we got to start going back to basics. The innovation curve, right? The early adopters, the middle, the late adopters, all that crossing the chasm stuff. That's all interesting, except we always get too excited about technology as a solution. And I think a lot of it can be done without AI, right? This reminds me of that story. I don't know if it was in the 70s or 80s when the United States invested into a pen that could write in outer space.
Mm-hmm.
And they basically spent a lot of money on research and finally invented something, a pen that would work in zero gravity environment. And then they went back to Soviet Union and said, hey, we created this awesome device. Look at that. It can write in the outer space. And the Soviet Union engineers said, yeah, we already have that device. And they're like, what? How? It's like, yeah, it's called a pencil. Right. So sometimes you don't need to necessarily go and use the latest thing, the greatest, because you could do the same thing. Now, AI could give you probably faster solution, but it might be costlier in the long term because you're using the intelligence instead of, let's say, algorithm. Algorithm does not need to evolve. Maybe the AI can finally produce one based on the data. Maybe it's a short-term solution, but I think in the long term, we can apply it in different areas and optimize. Now, there is use for AI. AI can handle a lot of various data, can start making sense of it, but the structure of where the data comes from is another challenge. And, the organizations typically struggle with that.
Well, it's really, this is like to sort of steal that meme a little bit, is if an AI ready organization is just a ready organization, the tasks, the improvements and the tasks and the things that you need to do to be AI ready are the things that you should be actually doing anyways. Cause it really is, it's understanding your business. It's making sure that you've got your processes well-defined and documented. And so you don't have, the cases where like Bob in engineering, disappears. And now suddenly you've got to go buy some new tool or something like that. You've got like all of these things that the things that go on are actually the things that you should be doing anyways, especially if you're going to scale and grow your organization. So really, AI ready is just getting yourself ready. And I've had these conversations with owners and entrepreneurs at times where they say, well, yeah, I should probably be doing that anyways. It's like, yes, you should. It's like, regardless of AI, regardless of what else you do, instead of maybe it takes that you're worried about a multi-million-dollar IT project you're about to, step into, and now you want to be AI ready. But it's really, you should have, the amount of work you're doing to prep for that, you should be doing that anyways. And that's actually better than spending the millions of dollars in IT. It's just like that. It's like, yeah, you can go buy a pen and you can spend all this money on this pen, but you know what? A pencil does exactly what you need, and it's already there. And that is a perfect example of us getting too blinded by the technology and saying there's all this stuff it can do. And it doesn't eliminate the stuff that we need to do anyways. It's not a shortcut. It's actually, it's way down there. AI is way down the line of automation and getting to that point. Like, if you're not, you may not even be ready to hardly get your business. Your business may be barely making money because you haven't figured out your processes. AI is not going to help. It's only going to make it worse, because you're going to take something broken or unknown, and it's just going to run it at high speed, and then probably it's going to fall apart.
Yeah, agreed. So in closing, let me ask you this one question. If there was a number one biggest mistake trying to introduce AI into the organization, what do you think that would be?
That's a tough one. The most costly thing I see, and this goes back to a lot of other projects as well, is data related. Is that their data is not clean, is not known, and they think that they can do more with their data than they can. They think that it's in better shape than it is. They think that it's, just, there's a lot that they misunderstand. It comes down to, with a lot of companies and integrations and such, it's mapping issues, but the mapping issues come down to nobody really knows what the data is and where it needs to go. And so is
it the lack of data or the structure of data?
It usually is more the structure and the validation. And so the structure is it's data integrity, I guess, is really, it comes out is you have structure, and they think they have it very structured, but it's a really like loosey-goosey structure. It's sort of wonky. And so you can put bad data in, and it's usually because somewhere down the road, somebody's like, I got to just jam this thing home. So it'd be just like, think about it, if you've got like just a physical thing that you're putting screws into it. If you're just screwing stuff in and screwing it back out, that's great. But every so often, if it like twists wrong and now somebody just drives it home and then, strips the threads on it, sooner or later, it's going to be a problem. And that's sort of what happens with business, is they think about it like, it's great, but they actually, like, you walk into a house and it's gorgeous, but there's this junk drawer that there's all this crap in there. That's sort of what businesses have, is they think they've got it all under control, but they've got all these extra little things that are going on that they don't understand. And so it is a false sense of security almost, that they'll walk into it and they'll say, yes, we can do all of this. And it's when you start having those questions that they realize, either the hard part is when they just answer like, oh yeah, this is what we do, this is the answer, not realizing that they don't actually know the answer, that they've been misinformed, or that that answer is actually out of date. So it becomes a little bit of a false sense of security, I think, if you want like one thing that runs into a lot, is that. Because, and those are the reason I say that so much, is because even in conversation after conversation after conversation, having the conversation, asking the questions, you can tell when you're talking to somebody that is really like trying to understand their business and understands the value of the answers that they're giving. You can see lights going on. They're like, wait a minute, I'm not sure enough about that answer. I'll ask, so-and-so over here, because I need to confirm that that's actually still the case. And that's where you start seeing it, for lack of a better term, it unravels, but they start seeing that, oh, there's some layers that we haven't thought about for a while. We do have to confirm that they're there. Sometimes they are, but more often than not, especially if you haven't done a regular review, then things go off course. It's like anything else, like finances or health or anything else. If you don't do regular checkups, then things have a tendency to drift, and that chaos can become a nightmare when you try to automate it and then put AI on it.
I would probably say that the biggest mistake is thinking that AI will immediately provide savings in efficiency and savings in productivity, and will yield to, shrinking staff or whatever somebody can envision that will be the financial benefit. I would say before anybody gets any kind of financial benefit out of it, just take a look at what you're learning, because most of the time AI will find weakest links that will need to be figured out. It will stress the system more. And until all those things are all aligned and fixed and problem solved, processes fine tuned, you're not going to get those benefits. And by the way, another risk is any kind of change in staff loses the domain knowledge. AI will never explain back to you how it's doing what it's doing. So you got to be very, very careful that you may lose touch to what's actually going on and creating a really, really big bottleneck in the middle.
That's actually in a bigger scale, what I'm seeing in markets and stuff like that, I think is exactly to your point, is that these companies are making moves based on savings that they project before any of those are realized. They're saying, oh, well, this is going to happen, so we're going to be able to, we can cut staff and we can have all these improvement gains. And they're trying to lock in those savings now before they become realized. And I think that is probably the biggest mistake, is that people are assuming too much. They're acting on it. And then, of course, I think we're going to see it's going to be interesting, like, somewhere down the road when all these companies realize that, oh, we jumped the gun. We got ahead of ourselves, and now we got to figure out how to bring all this back. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a bit of a mess for a while, because you're going to have some people that are going to be not happy because they just got tossed out because they weren't needed. And some of them aren't going to come back. You're going to lose key domain knowledge, and other people are going to be annoyed about it, because they're going to say, wait a minute, you got rid of Mary over there and she knew all this stuff. And now she's working for your competition and kicking butt over there. And now we're having to make up for, you guys jumping the gun.
Yeah, we live in interesting times. It's always interesting. Well, Rob, thanks again for joining me for this podcast. This was an awesome conversation. I will share Rob's information at the bottom of the podcast in the notes, and his LinkedIn, the website. If you have any questions about AI, he's a wealth of knowledge. Very interesting to talk and get his perspective. So I'm sure you'll be happy to reach out and connect, and maybe he could help you clear some things up about your assumptions. So thanks again for joining us. And Rob, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot. This has been great. Love it.